I'm honored to share with you today, my dear friends, these words from one of my bestest of pastor theologian friends. Although we've never met except in my relationship through his writings and commentaries. Our devotional reading for this morning is from one of my favorite prophets, Trito Isaiah, and it's one of my favorite preaching texts. Hey there, all who are thirsty, come to the water. Are you penniless? Come anyway. Buy and eat. Come, buy your drinks. Buy wine and milk. Buy without money. Everything's free. Why do you spend your money on junk food, your hard-earned cash on cotton candy? Listen to me. Listen well. Eat only the best. Fill yourself with only the finest. Pay attention. Come close now. Listen carefully to my life-giving, life-nourishing words. I'm making a lasting covenant commitment with you, the same that I made with David. Sure, solid, enduring love. I set him up as a witness to the nations, made him a prince and leader of the nations, and now I'm doing it to you. You'll summon nations you've never heard of, and nations who've never heard of you will come running to you because of me, your God, because the Holy of Israel has honored you. Seek God while he's here to be found. Pray to him while he's close at hand. Let the wicked abandon their way of life and the evil way of thinking. Let them come back to God, who is merciful. Come back to our God, who is lavish with forgiveness. I don't think the way you think. The way you work isn't the way I work, God's decree. For as the sky soars high above earth, so the way I work surpasses the way you work, and the way I think is way beyond the way you think. This is from Isaiah 55 as it's found in Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, The Message. And now I invite you to grab your coffee or tea or whatever your favorite morning or lunchtime beverage might be, for this is a fairly long but well worth the time to listen to or read if you're reading on my Facebook page. It's titled A Covenant of Neighborly Justice, subtitled Break the Chains of Quid Pro Quo by Waldemar Brueggemann, contributor. In this midst of Lent, this text of summons may be a sobering one for us. In this election season, amid shrill or buoyant rhetoric, we may notice that there are real choices to be made, even as the Jews in ancient Babylon were confronted with choices of a most elemental kind. The verses that I just shared with you are addressed to elite Israelites who had been forcibly deported to Babylon when Jerusalem had been destroyed. While these deported elites yearned for a return to Jerusalem, it's clear that they also came to terms with the Babylonian regime and the Babylonian economy, enough to participate in the opportunities and requirements of the imperial order. In doing so, they inevitably compromised their quite distinctive Jewish identity as members of a neighborly covenant. It was an uneasy balancing act for them to participate fully in the dominant economy and to practice at the same time an intentional and distinctive faith identity. That same uneasy balance is the very one that many of us seek to maintain in our own political economic setting. Into that uneasy arrangement comes the powerful poetry of the text from Isaiah 55. The message of Isaiah is that he wants his Jewish listeners to heed his call to remember their distinctive identity, and so to retreat from commitment to the empire. The purpose of his summons is that his listeners will be prepared to return to Jerusalem with a clear covenantal identity, because geopolitics is about to permit such a release as the grip of Babylon wanes in the face of Persian power. In verses 1 through 5, the poet calls his listeners to make a clear choice. He offers them an option of the generous self-giving of Yahweh, the God of covenant. This God has in times past given Israel manna bread and water in the wilderness, and will now generously give all that is needed for life: free milk, free water, and free wine, all gifts of God. But reception of these free gifts in faith requires his listeners to choose against the quid pro quo economy of Babylon. In that imperial economy of demand production, these deported Jews had to do work that was not satisfying. They had to buy consumer goods that had no sustaining value. The quid pro quo of production, that is, labor for that which does not satisfy, and consumption, that which is not bread, is in fact a dead-end project that only results in fatigue, disappointment, and despair. The summons of the poem is that, because of the living God, an alternative way is possible. That alternative way is a homecoming that will be enacted because of God's fidelity to the covenant with David. In verses 6 through 9, the poet introduces a second riff. While verses 6 through 7 may be familiar to us as a generic call to worship, in fact, these verses are not a call to worship. Rather, they are a call to sanity in a quite specific social situation. The quote, wickedness, unquote, and the quote, unrighteousness, unquote, of which Israel is to repent, concerns Israel's wholesale compromises with the quid pro quo of the Babylonian Empire that entailed a shift away from covenantal commitments. Thus, the Jews who compromised with Babylonian practices, values, and procedures of production and consumption are invited back to the generous governance of Yahweh, who, in the context of the parsimonious empire, gives the gifts needed for life. To return to Yahweh is to depart the Babylonian calculus and re-engage the covenantal values of a neighborly kind. The ground for such a radical re-engagement with faith is the elemental contrast between the anxious assumption of deported Jews who thought they were on their own in Babylon, and the intention of Yahweh, who has indeed left God's people on their own for a time. You might go back and refresh yourself by reading Isaiah 54, verses 7 and 8. A God who has left people on their own time for a time, but who will now provide them with what they need. The poem makes a vigorous and emphatic contrast between, quote, your ways and thoughts, unquote, and God's, quote, ways and thoughts, unquote. the poet dares to introduce Israel in exile, an alternative resolve that has not been on their screen. Quote, your ways, unquote. You who have colluded with the empire of quid pro quo is a way of fear, scarcity, and anxiety that requires labor that does not satisfy and purchases that are not bred. God's way, by contrast, is a way of generous, reliable fidelity that makes such fearful collusion both inappropriate and unnecessary. Thus, Israel's listeners are summoned to deal with the reality of God, God's ways, God's thought, and God's future that constitute a palpable alternative to the offer of Babylon. My dear friends, it takes no deep imagination to see that this poem continues its powerful summons in a contemporary way even for us. Perhaps especially in an election season that converges, for now, with Lent. The political rhetoric to which we are now relentlessly exposed is either A, to be very afraid and angry about a system that has not kept its promises, or B, to have confidence in the restored system that will keep its promise of well-being and security. Either way, in fear and anger, or in confidence in the system, the horizon of our political rhetoric is, perforce, limited to the claims of the U.S. market and the promise of security guaranteed by the national security state. Both market ideology and the national security state are given cover by the claims of U.S. exceptionalism that boldly offers theological assurance as the chosen of God. All of that, however, market, security, exceptionalism, assume that there is no, quote, way, unquote, but the, quote, way, unquote, of the way of the U.S. market security system, no, quote, thought, unquote, except the thought that the United States is God's most surely chosen people. All of that, whether in despair or in pride, bets everything on the imperial wonder of the United States, thus not very different from that of ancient Babylon. The choice to which the text may summons us is a choice for a covenantal horizon that allows for a purpose other than our own. That alternative choice is grounded in a holy claim, but it has real-life political implications. The covenantal offer has in purview a practice of neighborly justice on which we can see in Isaiah 56:1. This alternative breaks the harsh demand of quid pro quo. It recognizes that there are neighbors who are entitled to generosity. It knows that healthy social relationships depend on generous hospitality. It consents that instead of score-keeping quid pro quo, large acts of forgiveness are in order, large acts that include cancellation of the debts of the poor. The news is that the reality of God creates alternatives in real time. Lent is an opportunity to host such alternatives. The election season is a time for deep, critical faith that exposes phony ideological claims. In ancient time, only some few took the option of returning to a covenantal identity that is grounded in another way and another thought. We now, in the presence of this text, face a like opportunity. And so Walter Brueggemann, at the end of this article, this commentary, this mini sermon, if you will, this prophetic voice, offers to us these Bible study questions. First, number one, at times, many of us feel caught up in a quid pro quo cycle. We go to work to pay the bills. To pay the bills, we go to work. What are some spiritual disciplines you use to break this cycle and break into the life of abundance in God? 2, the scarcity worldview of quid pro quo living is in direct conflict with God's gift of abundance. In scarcity, we believe there is not enough, so we do not give graciously to those in need. How does scarcity thinking show up in your life? If you could believe you had unlimited resources, how would you shop more or give more of yourself to others? Does it even matter? 3, God's ways and thoughts are different than our ways and thoughts. How is God calling you to break us of our self-absorption and into true community? What would experiencing a covenantal horizon and living for a purpose other than your own look like this week? Again, this commentary and these questions, the work of Walter Brueggemann, as accessed on the HuffPost webpage this day, February the 27th, 2024. You can go to huffpost.com and find this article. You will also find it in manuscript form on my Facebook page.